like to call the meeting of the Land Use Advisory Committee to order for November 17th, 2022. First up is approval of the agenda. That's a consensus thing. If nobody has any changes, we'll consider the agenda approved. We skip the minutes since we don't have a quorum. And we will go on to community designations. Raya.
I think I should have sent it.
You can move that.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, everyone.
Howdy.
I think you know me by now. But Raya Esmaeili, here to talk about community designations again. And, but there are other things on the agenda today, so that will be a change. I think it's just me here today. Paul is available for any questions later, so I'll just wait. There we go. So this one you have seen before, just kind of showing where in the process of the project we are. We are in Q4 2022. Last time that we were here, we talked about basically picking one proposal to move forward with the rest of the project. If you remember, it was proposal B. Well, I guess it was the middle proposal that we decided to move forward with, and the step after we came to LUAC was just some very slight refinements to that proposal B for some outliers that have come out, and then we shared that map with a request for comments to all the local governments in the Twin Cities metro area. We gave them about 3 weeks to give us feedback on these designations. We tried to be as clear as we could in the sense that the comment that we were, or the feedback that we were intending to receive was only related to the groupings themselves, and they were not at this point yet associated with any policies. And of course that made it a little difficult for communities to be able to provide feedback, because everyone wants to know what policies are associated with them. So, but we still got quite a bit of information, and I just want to go back to this for a second. So we are still in Q4. We did do that refinement, sent the information, got the feedback from the local governments, and are still doing that refinements based on their feedback. And we are going to start our density evaluation as well. And what's coming next is basically will mostly be actions that will be taken. So you saw this one. So this is sorry about the change of colors. We tried to make it, this is definitely not final by any means. These colors, yeah, no. These colors are just so that they show distinctions between the groups as clearly as possible on all screens. As we had talked before, any areas outside of MUSA have not really changed, but we still did try to gather feedback from everybody in case any comments came from any communities outside of MUSA that were related to policy discussions that are coming later on in the process of the 2050 regional planning process. So these are the draft designations at the moment. There are some slight changes with proposal B that you had seen here. For example, the city of Maple Grove had shifted, going back and forth a little bit. There's like maybe like 5 communities that had shifted between proposal B and what we shared with the communities, because after we brought it to you and we had talked about how there will be potentially some slight changes based on the data behind the analysis, and some additional feedback and knowledge that we received from our staff internally about what's happening in different communities. So what I have listed on the left are the list of the variables. I have included MUSA in here, but as you know, it's not really in the mix the same way that the rest of the variables are. It's just that the fact that those other variables are analyzed inside of MUSA.
Which ones changed?
I'm sorry, I should have brought my notebook. There are only a handful. Like we changed a couple, which seems like we might actually change back based on the feedback that we received. So I'm trying to think, like for example, you see Anoka up on the top, and then here it's changed.
Also, it's blue like the neighbors
Yeah.
instead of darker, okay.
Right. And then Deep Haven has changed. Right. So they're like, I can definitely provide you that list. I unfortunately didn't bring my notebook that I had all of that in it. Sorry. But we received a total of 27 responses. And out of those 27 responses, we did ask communities about what they thought about their own grouping and their own designation and the rest of the communities they were in. We also asked them if they had other information about the rest of the region. Maybe they believe that some other designations should or shouldn't work a certain way. There were a total of 7 suggestions for some designation changes. But we did receive comments that basically said most of the designations seemed accurate. They did talk about, we did receive a couple comments about the importance of recognizing differences within one community, and we had talked about that at this committee then, that one community inside of it can be so different from one side to the other, but opted for not having multiple designations inside of MUSA because local planning and regional planning not really crossing the line in that area. Also, the need to revisit these designations based on land use policies. As I mentioned, this was a bit challenging to try to provide feedback without knowing anything further, and we did acknowledge that, and that there will be additional points along the way to come back to these designations when we know more, and also even afterwards, after all the policy plans are adopted in the local comprehensive planning process, when we have had several designations that change in the 2040. So this is an iterative process, and also appreciation for the engagement that we've had, and also some comment about consideration for smaller communities in terms of comprehensive planning, which is one of those example of one of those comments that doesn't quite fit in this project, but we will carry it forward in the rest of the planning process. So in this map, I'm taking the MUSA out so that it's easier to see. Where we are right now is that we are going to, as I mentioned, incorporate those designation changes, that suggestions that we have received through our feedback process. But also, there's one other point in the process, and we were also trying to be really clear here. When we shared this map, the categories were called Group A, B, C, D, no name. And we've been very clear that these are not the same categories, even though they look the same. Some of them, like people are inclined to call them, for example, urban center, suburban edge. But these are the 2050 community designation. As such, we would like to entertain the idea and conversation and discussion on these designation names. So there are 2 options that we have. We can keep the names from Thrive MSP 2040. Of course, there's one less category here, so we're gonna figure that out. Or come up with completely new names. And that's one thing that I was hoping that we could talk about here today. With that, I'm just gonna open it for any feedback.
Go ahead,
Madam
Bill.
Chair, thank you. I guess from my standpoint, to keep continuity from the plans, I think it makes sense to keep the same names and then make it work that way. If we start changing names again, I think it gets convoluted. That's just my opinion.
Anybody else?
I think our analysis of when we had the designation urban in a first range suburb, we didn't feel that quite fit in Roseville because we don't have sidewalks on every street. We don't have a lot of the characteristics that an urban community has, and we have a lot of people that think of themselves as suburban. And so I don't know if there's a way to, at least with the first range suburbs, maybe think about if it's urban edge instead of urban or something like that sort of helps differentiate a little more from the urban center. That's about the only feedback that I have. I think by and large the existing designations seem all right.
So call the dark purple urban and then have a different name for the light purple.
I think that was the idea.
I mean, one of the things that Paul and I have talked about, for example, is instead of dropping, if for example, the thought was to go with the same names, instead of dropping emerging suburban edge, dropping urban center. So that
Yeah.
Oh, so
the
everybody
first
moves
would
in
be,
one.
yeah,
No.
urban, suburban edge, emerging suburban edge, so that, and that's, because that's one of the pushbacks that sometimes we have, or I have heard, it relates to the notion of the word urban versus suburban, even though for this purpose, they really are just names, but they do come with quite a bit of weight, and that some communities are reluctant to agree with that designation because it makes it seem like they're agreeing that they're an urban community, which they do not want to be. So that's also a,
That would work.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, that's a good idea. But I feel a little weird about Lakeville being emerging suburban edge, but I think I could get over that. Carl?
I don't think it'd be appropriate to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. You know, have a bunch of names that people have kind of gotten used to, adjust what the names identify, maybe tweak the wording a little bit, but I think there's value in going with the current designations with whatever tweaking is appropriate. Otherwise, people, no matter what we come up with, someone's not gonna like it. And they're gonna criticize it, and then they'll be, well, why'd you do that? So, you know, what we have isn't, you know, it's not really not working, it's just a question of trying to get a better, little clearer identification and that type of thing that may fit a little better with people's comfort zones, and you can do something along those lines, and that makes perfect sense.
Okay, so we skipped the minutes because we didn't have a quorum, and I think we still don't, or do we? I don't know what the vacancy is. Okay. And we're talking about the community designations, and it pretty much went with the recommendation that we had, and now they're talking about keep the old names or change names.
Madam Chair, can I change the subject for just a second?
Sure.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
We are thrilled.
We're all very happy for
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
We're here to help.
Yeah, you got the mayor club here to help you. Okay, any other thoughts on different names versus same names? I mean, that seems to make sense, like, it'd be a hassle to come up with all new names that mean anything and translate without a whole lot of explanation, so.
yes. I think Lisa was there for the last round, so she remembers that session of LUAC when it was just like naming, took a while.
It was multiple conversations with council members and LUAC and council members again, and like, that's a lot. Because we hadn't given them names either, we just said, this is denser than that one.
Yeah.
That's essentially more dense, middle dense, less dense. So, yeah, definitely way easier.
So, just to make sure that I heard everybody, you're more in favor of option one, but maybe with some tweaks, whether it is to drop the first category and bump everybody basically, or shift the names slightly so that people don't get confused because now they're emerging suburban edge or something like that. Did I hear that? Okay. Because we are hoping to bring that back to you at the next LUAC meeting in January, along with the designations themselves, so that you will make your final recommendation to the CDC for their meeting in February, and then subsequently Metropolitan Council meeting in, also in February, but later. It's just, again, to mention, these are basically draft community designations still, and they will remain that way until they're adopted as part of the 2050 Regional Development Guide and all the policy plans together. So that's why we will continue calling it a draft document, but will be used from this point on for any of the rest of the planning process for the 2050 Regional Development Guide. That is basically the end of my presentation.
So January meeting, we actually vote.
Yes, that
Up or
will be an
down?
action.
Yes. So we have to have a quorum in January so that we can vote on it. Anybody have any concerns that they haven't been able to bring up yet?
Nice job.
Thank you for all the feedback that you have provided and support throughout this all year.
Are we gonna get to weigh in on all of the other stuff, the density things and all of that?
Yes, and I'm sure that will be something that Lisa will talk about very shortly.
plan.
But density analysis, I did mention at the start of like the density evaluation, that is something that I will bring to you. At this point, we won't be recommending any minimum density requirement associated with any of these community designations because there is a lot of other policies that are at this point unknown, and it just doesn't seem right to do that without knowing, say, forecast or capacity of communities to grow and then just giving them a number. So we will continue that conversation, and you will continue to see me next year on a different topic.
Well, I'll keep bringing snacks so that you wanna come back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so next up is the update on the 2050 Regional Development Guide timeline and milestones. Dan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. My name is Dan Marckel. I am a plan analyst in community development research. Most of my work is working on the next regional plan, so the 2050 plans. And I think I have the easiest job here today, which is to give you a super overview, to give you a sense of what the whole operation is for getting to the next regional plans, and then turn it loose to the next presenter to talk about some specifics. And then when Lisa comes on later, she'll talk about what you want to do within that framework. So I have about 3 slides that are about much consequence. So if any questions you have, ask questions along the way. It's pretty straightforward. We are working on the 2050 Regional Development Guide and policy plans. The new version of Thrive, essentially. And I'll describe some goals and timelines and milestones, the big picture. There is a range of projects that we'll talk about. The most of what I'm talking about is going to be a range of projects. And then next up will be the scenarios discussion that Baris will come up and lead. So we've started the work towards the next regional plans with a pretty straightforward goal to make this a set of more integrated and coordinated plans that go from big ideas to implementation. In Thrive, we had some nice big ideas, sustainability and livability, et cetera. The linkage to our actual actions, we want to get better this time. Like, what are we actually going to do about those big ideas? So this diagram that you see, you may see this coming forward quite a bit. We're going from existing conditions. You've talked about values and vision in this committee, I believe. Crafting a shared vision, shared goals, objectives, all the way down to policy actions. If you look at the lower left, I don't expect any of us to read those words in the green arrow. I can't. But it says land use specific policies and land use specific actions. So that green thing at the lower left is land use. The idea is that they'd be highly coordinated with the housing policies and actions, which is the blue one, the parks things, which is the other one, transportation and water. So coordinating across the council from the get-go. That was one of the requests and one of the comments in our public comment period last time, which we take very seriously.
Question. So under parks, transportation, and water, you have both actions and investments, but under housing specific and land use specific, there's just actions but not investments.
I applaud your eyes. You're exactly right. There's no particular reason for that. There are certain investments in housing. There are investments in land use in some ways, but the parks, transportation, and water investments, they dwarf the investments in the other things, so they just didn't make it onto this thing. But good catch, and that will be updated.
Okay.
If I may too, and parks, transportation, and wastewater, those are regional systems, and we're required by law to create a regional system plan that includes our capital plans, and that's really what the investment element is, the capital plan for each of those regional systems. Land use and housing aren't regional systems, so we don't have that, but like Dan was saying, we have obviously grant programs and other investments in housing that we own, for example. They just don't fall into that capital plan sort of requirement.
I had a feeling, I just wanted to hear you say it.
On the record.
Well, and I think it's maybe better that you don't put the other tab in there because people get a little nervous about us trying to change those other things into regional systems. And I could see some panic if we did that. So it's a good catch, but I think there's a good reason not to have that extra tab there.
Over the coming months, we will be fleshing this out with details, and it'll become hopefully clearer that there are those system responsibilities are matched up with this. Having said that, this diagram is probably from 3 or 4 months ago, so it's pretty much stuck, and so people internally anyways are pretty happy with the idea that we're trying to coordinate. That's the purpose of this. Those words over on the right-hand side, by the way, those are words that we're going to continue and increasingly start using as we develop the plan language. So learn them, love them, you'll see them again. There's a reason behind the slide. This is a multi-year initiative. Again, you don't have to read the things to know that this started at least in 2021. It goes this chart through the system statements in September 2025, which then leads, of course, into comprehensive plans and responses from cities, the endless cycle. But it is a multi-year initiative, and you'll see us back for more discussions over the coming years, months and years. So I hope to see you again. But there are components to this that we want to highlight for you, especially. The blue line in the very middle of the slide here suggests that we're about halfway through the effort here. We've done a lot of internal work. We've done some work with committees like yourselves, and this is kind of an inflection point where we're going to be working more with more people going forward. The cascade of blue boxes in the center of the slide is some key projects I just want to let you know are happening that might impact your work a little bit, or you might be interested in. The regional vision and values work, certainly, I think you've had conversations about that. That work continues, it's starting to have its effect, and continues on. By the way, the fact those boxes stop in the middle of the year doesn't mean the work stops, it's like there's work going on in that area. So regional vision and values. In water especially, they've very formally gone through and looked at the issues that our region is facing in water of all sorts. And so they're producing a set of white papers that will be of great interest. And I believe that this group met with, I think, MOSAC some months or meetings ago as a joint committee meeting that everybody in MOSAC at least was very excited about. Hopefully you guys were too. That sort of cross-fertilization helped us talk about cross-fertilization within the different plans. So water issues have been going on, white papers are coming out. That third one, scenario exploration, this is something that Baris is going to talk about after me. And it's really looking at what are the possible futures of this region. This is a strange time for cities. Is commuting going to change? Where are people going to work? What's going to happen with immigration? Lots of things are changing. So we're engaged in exploration of different scenarios. If you like that sentence, wait for Baris, because she'll give you more. Community designations, obviously you guys have been in the middle of that, and there's transportation studies. This is just to suggest that there's a lot of individual projects going on. It's your job to say, how does that relate to land use, and it's our job to like figure that out and come back to you with more information about how it aligns. And so all questions are welcomed. We look forward to the discussion over the next month. There's a couple of things on there, scenario projections and regional forecasts. Now, there are blue boxes in the middle there. Regional forecasts are what eventually we produce by law to say, here's where we think the future of the region is going. Those don't really start until at least the middle of next year. So at this point, most of this talk about the future of the region is mostly hypothetical. We're looking for broad directions so that we land in the right place, having thought about the whole thing. And though we're working on the policy plans, we're really not drafting policy at this point. We're getting ready to draft policy, which kind of will start in 2023 as we're doing kind of broad engagement, working our way towards more articulation of policy, leading to the red star at the end of 2024, which is the adoption of the plans. So we love this process stuff. Hope you do too. We can answer particular questions or talk about the process if you want to. Those green boxes at the top, by the way, with question marks in them, they're an invitation. What do you guys want to do in this process? That's what you're going to talk about at the end of this. Oh, and thank you. That's all I have. Questions?
Any questions or comments?
Sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's okay. We heard you were stuck in traffic. There's snacks there, cookies if you want a cookie. It's your reward for showing up.
Did you notice that I snuck in too, like no one saw me?
You stayed away from the cookies. You stayed on
Yes.
the other way. But
Thank you.
we're glad that you're here. You do make a quorum for us, so we can go back and approve the minutes.
Oh. Good,
So, yeah, it was worth it.
totally.
So do we have a motion and a second for the minutes from September 15th?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved, yay. We got our one business item done. Okay, any other questions, comments for Dan?
One last comment for me. Thanks for the cookie. That was really
Oh,
good.
you're welcome, yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to the future work that we get to do, digging more into the community designations and whatnot. It's been way up here so far, and sometimes it's fun to get a little more in the weeds.
I'd be interested in learning a little bit more about the transportation studies. And I don't know about helping to draft policy, but at least, get a chance to see what is drafted in the future. I don't know about the rest of the folks.
Well, I think we will see that, won't we?
Yes.
Okay.
We will give you as much as you're willing to read.
Probably more.
It makes the driving easier.
Oh, okay. Any other questions, comments on that one?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
At the top, you have those green boxes. I mean, I guess is sustainability part of some of that, or is that already incorporated in some of these blue boxes?
The issue with theme and ideas around sustainability is kind of a core idea, cross-cutting idea that's working its way through this plan. It now strikes me that these boxes that I showed were all like particular efforts. Sustainability is an idea that should flow through all those efforts.
Okay.
It's in the values and vision part of
Okay,
things.
that's fine, thank you.
To the question though, of more to read, as we go forward, there is a web page dedicated to this effort that will increasingly be populated with material. if you like to read material about regional planning, you're gonna be well served by the external facing website, and there's internal material that might even be of more interest to you, to your appetite.
Can we send out a link to the website for everybody?
Sure.
Great. Anything else?
Was there anything before, was this the first thing on the agenda item?
First thing was community designations,
Okay.
and we did pretty much a status quo sort of a thing. There's one less category, suburban edge and emerging suburban edge are sort of melded into one category. And then we discussed about the names, whether we wanted totally new names or keep the same names, and the consensus was to sort of tweak the names since we have one less category, and the people that were in the urban part didn't really feel urban, so shuffling around a little bit so that it's a little more reflective, but that maybe the top category, urban center, goes away and everybody else moves up, or some tweaking along those lines. Did you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I struggle with the purpose of community designations. And I understand that categorization is helpful in lots of area of life, and people like to categorize things. So we have this big project on categorizing communities, and I don't know where it's headed or the usefulness of it. I would love an explanation, if that's okay to get one.
Leonard?
Absolutely, thank you, Madam Chair. Committee member, community designations are both a basis for how the council considers guiding growth and development in the region, where we are planning to provide urban services within the MUSA and not outside of the MUSA, so the urban and rural planning areas, and then within those designations for developing land use policies that are suitable to like communities. So our expectations around density, our expectations potentially around natural resources, around transportation, and even our colleagues across in other divisions who are considering different types of infrastructure investments, such as, say, transitway investment, our expectations around density, around station areas and how they flow from one community to the next, difference between Minneapolis and St. Paul station area densities versus Oakdale station area density, for example. So providing enough context in the built environment for more specific land use policies that doesn't just clump everybody into the same type of, everyone should be like Minneapolis type. That's what we're trying to avoid, but really recognizing the landscape of difference amongst communities.
And the density piece is a big part of it because we have to put big pipes in the ground based on the ultimate density of communities. And so that's got to be figured out way ahead.
Yeah, so I get the density on piping, that I get. But I think in categorizing, like our town, for example, with Hugo, which is in theory approximately the same distance from the urban core, I think we'll end up in the same category. I'm not 100%
Could
sure
you
on
speak
that.
up louder so we can hear you?
That is not a problem for me, yes. A problem with categorizing and homogenizing towns is it treats my town like Hugo or Woodbury or whatever, and I don't think it serves a purpose for the kind of planning. Like, I feel as if each part of planning should be siloed, and when the Met Council talks about planning for water or planning for sewer, that should be planned as that each town should be planned based on that provided service. Not lump all the like if you categorize like my town's sewers are gonna be different than other towns who are categorized like me. My town's transportation needs are gonna be different than other towns that are gonna be categorized the same as me. Like to take and broad brush a town or a geographical area, it misses the differences on the key areas of under Met Council's jurisdiction. I think it's not a good, I think it so much identifies by towns that are like each other with no clear identification of needs. And it's sort of like, I think it does the opposite of its intended purpose. And I think in this case, categorization does more harm than good. I still don't, even with that explanation, I don't see why having a category of town, if you're gonna be talking about park service, the towns that are categorized the same are not gonna have the same need for park service. They're not gonna have the same need for sewer. I believe the towns are too different. And it broad brushes all the towns together, and it's categorizing in the towns that are similar, I guess, but I still think it's a exercise that didn't need to happen. I still don't, it's categorizing for the sake of categorization. I don't actually think it'll serve a purpose. But I think I might be alone in that. If I was designing the sewer system, I'd pay no mind to the actual category. I would look at the real service needs and build it from there. So I think that's all I will cede my time.
Carl?
We're looking at 50, 75, 100, 200 years worth going backwards and forwards. And what this area looked like 100 years ago, you know, Minneapolis is different than Richfield, is different than Burnsville on the south.
Yeah.
And each community developed in its own unique way. And at one time, one was an urban edge, one was a suburban, one was this, but as it's evolved and the communities have evolved, they're also changing. So it's not, we're not sticking anybody into a certain designation permanently. It's kind of identifying to a certain extent kind of where we're at today to try to identify the most urgent needs, but it could still, just like planning, you know, we have zoning and land use and all this kind of stuff. We change it all the time based on what the current needs are. So I think this is not necessarily trying to put every square peg in a square hole and round peg in a round hole. I think it's more like we'll be shaving the corners off some of the square pegs because of the way that community chose to develop within the boundaries that they have. You know, I live in Lakeville. Lakeville moved there in '79. It's a completely different community today than it was in 1979. When I moved there in '79, it was like 14,000 people. At the sign of the freeway said 10,000 in '79. In 1980 census, it was 14,000. So, but Lakeville has evolved and developed. It has developed differently than Burnsville did. And Burnsville developed differently than Bloomington did, and based on the terrain and the grades and all the different kind of things. So it's not necessarily like we're trying to say, this is what you're going to be and this is what you are. It's trying to just have some kind of a feeling for the land use and what we project that to be.
Yeah, I understand that.
You know, and so I appreciate that, but you can't get by without, pretty hard to get by without some kind of a label identifying what that particular area is closest to, not necessarily exactly what it is. I guess that's the only little comment I can make, and that we have to do something so we can look out there.
Well, in part of that conversation, Raya was talking about how, as we actually go through the process, we find that some people don't, or some communities don't actually belong in that category, and we move them into a different one. Like, I think it was Cottage Grove that moved down a category because their terrain would not work for the category that we were in. This is a fluid thing that can change. It's not set in stone, and it will morph over time as the plan goes on. So you could move your community into a different category. I mean, that was, actually was part of the discussion was, did we need one that's still extra suburban category for the people on the edge?
In our
And-
town, it's like the Musa line runs right through our town.
Yeah.
So we have clear delineation even in the town.
Well, and Lakeville was like that. Lakeville still has the Musa running through town. It's getting more and more of the town as time in the last 30 years that I've
Sure.
lived there. But there's a lot of places where the Musa goes right through town and you've got
Sure.
farms on one side or whatever. But I think it's more about putting communities on a spectrum so that we can have sort of a range of things that we're talking about, because what goes on in Minneapolis has pretty much nothing to do with what goes on in Corcoran. So having some range in there so we can kind of right-size things to different communities, I think is better than like what we did with the water supply plan the last time we did it. We had one chapter for each city in the entire region, and it was really not very informative or useful. You could look up each city, but it didn't really help people understand what was going on. So this time we're grouping regional water supply areas so it makes more sense on how things come together. Because what the council is working on is the parts that cities are doing that have to come together. What happens on your borders affects your
Yeah.
neighbors and that sort of thing.
So I think the one thing, the caveat I carved was sewer and water. It totally makes sense. The other stuff doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
It's like I'm an elected official, so I'm part of government, but it seems like a typical government project that gives us information. I just question the usefulness of it, except for parks, or except for sewer and water.
Okay.
But
Well, I mean, we can discuss it some more offline if you'd like.
that's totally, yes, I'd love to have a conversation about it.
Sure, okay. Where were we at?
Next up, scenario planning, unless there are other questions.
Yeah, any more for Dan before we move on? Okay, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
So next up, we have the scenario planning. Introduction to scenario.
Oh, sorry. Hi, everyone, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Gumus-Dawes. I work at the Community Development Division as a planning analyst. I also
Move
run.
the mic a little closer,
Oh,
closer,
sorry.
you're quiet.
I'll come closer. I'm also the project lead for the scenario planning work that is going on at the council, and it's part of the 2050 regional development planning guide, basically. So let me just start using this for a change. So today what I want to do is to introduce you to the idea of scenario planning and talk about a little bit about its purpose and describe how it works, and I want to end on the land use implications of the framework. Traditionally, the way we do scenario planning is we just look at the past trends and we try to figure out what's going to happen in the future, and we kind of extrapolate from that and assume that whatever happened in the past will carry on for the future. And this kind of planning it just really doesn't look at any uncertainties in the future. It just focuses on one thing: whatever happened will continue into the future. In a new kind of scenario planning that we are kind of dabbling in for the first time at the council, we're trying to consider the fact that, you know, the future might play out pretty differently over time. I mean, we had the pandemic now, no one anticipated it. We had the Great Recession in the middle of 2008. So we're just trying to learn from those experiences and start asking the question, okay, so what could happen? What could possibly happen in the future, and how can we learn, anticipate them ahead of time so that we can learn and try to foresee what might happen and plan for it. So as part of this, we are thinking of asking 4 questions, and that's part of the scenario planning framework. What kind of uncertainties shape the region? How do they impact the region as a whole? How do they impact the council's infrastructure and services? And finally, what we could do to address those impacts. So I just want to start with a disclaimer about what this project is not. We always talk about what it is, and I want to be upfront from the get-go, because these are things that come up, and people often say, why did you wait until the last minute to tell us that? So I'm just going to go ahead with sort of a disclaimer ahead of time. In this exercise, we're really not picking a future. It's just simply trying to explore some of the things that might come our way, and we're just exploring so that we can prepare for the future. So we don't have a favored future. We just want to explore things so that we can be prepared. And then the other thing that comes up a lot is people start thinking, oh, is this our regional forecast? We're not going to have more than one forecast. We'll have one single forecast, and this is just a hypothetical planning exercise for us to entertain so that we can, again, prepare for the future. Sometimes it could be confusing for people because we're using the very same forecast tools that we use for our official forecast. But at this point, this is just a hypothetical planning exercise, and it answers the question, what if?
And the actual forecast comes in 2024?
Right, Connor?
It's like an 18-month process. I think the first visible results would be fall of 2023.
And then people get to complain that it's wrong, and then we adjust them.
Right.
Exactly, right. That's how we wrote it.
Okay, thank you.
So why are we doing this process? And the main goal of scenario planning is really to try to help people, especially policymakers, to assist them in different points in time as they're going through the policy planning process. So one of the pieces that we think about is trying to highlight what kinds of goals and objectives that we have. In some cases, people look at a scenario and say, what do you like about this scenario? In other cases, people say, what do you dislike about it? And as we talk about the pros and cons, we start figuring out why is that a good thing for, and we kind of reveal our goals and objectives, and this is especially the case for land use as well. And as we're thinking about the future, we also start thinking about the risks and opportunities and potential policy gaps that we might have. Because when we look at the future, we see certain trends, and these trends might create either risks or opportunities. Anticipating ahead of time what they might be gives us an idea of thinking about potential policies that maybe we haven't had in the past, or maybe committing to some that we have and shying away from others that we didn't have before. And the other piece is when we look at scenarios, we orient a lot of our policies toward each scenario. And this is a multi-policy exercise. In that sense, we'll be looking at transportation policy, land use policy. We will be looking at wastewater policy, and all of these things interact with each other. And in the past, we didn't really have a means to be able to do that. And now we are able to, by using this particular framework, we're able to do that, and we're able to look at the trade-offs. In some cases, these policies might be counteracting. In some cases, the policies might be really synergetic, that they might be reinforcing each other. And we'll try to take advantage of those that are synergetic to be able to move our goals forward. And the final goal of this exercise is to really inform future land use policy choices. So the whole framework is really a tool to be able to have some policy conversations. It's just a matter of trying to reveal people's values or goals and objectives, and for people to judge how effective certain policies would be if we were to take a certain direction.
So it helps you have examples to actually visualize how these things play out, so you can make a better, more informed opinion about what's good. Is that?
Exactly.
Okay.
I should pass it on to you, you're doing a nice job. So I'm not quite sure how familiar you are with the forecasting process in here, and I want to start with that a little bit so that you can see why the scenarios are important for certain processes we have at the council. And I'm going to start with the forecasts that we have because they're crucial to our scenarios. So every year, as you know, every 10 years we have a regional forecast, and every 10 years that comes attached to it comes the local forecast. So these two are our most informed or best informed estimates of how the region is going to grow, how much it's going to grow. That's our regional forecast. And then it's our best informed guess. The local forecasts are our best informed guess as to where both people and jobs will be located. So this is a kind of a complicated process when you use multiple models to estimate these, and every 10 years this process is renewed. And the results of these forecasts are used by almost everybody in the council. For our environmental services division, they use these forecasts to come up with wastewater demand, and they use it to analyze the quality and supply of water in the region. They look at the implications. We also look at local housing demand by using these forecasts. We do look at travel demand, transit ridership, parks demand, and also regional affordable housing needs. These are all functions that the council serves, and we use the regional and local forecasts to be able to work with the divisions and for planning, systems planning. So we have our best shot at this. We have fairly sophisticated models to be able to have our forecasts. But there are certain things that we have really no control over. So for instance, with the pandemic, we don't know what the birth rates are going to be like going down the road. And we don't know how telework will impact climate, telework will impact the workforce in this place. We don't know how the climate will impact our population in here. Climate refugees are a real concept, and we're going to be probably on the receiving end of it. And most importantly, we don't know how immigration will change. So in terms of the total number of people who work here and live here, there is a lot of uncertainty about that. And in terms of local forecasts, we really don't know where people are going to be living in the region itself. So we don't know how permanent telework would be, for instance. So are people going to work in their homes? Are they going to work in their offices? And if it is happening, if telework is happening now to the extent that it is, how likely is it to continue? And also, we don't know where people would like to live in general, where business would like to locate, or where residents would like to live. So as a result of this, we have our regional forecasts and local forecasts are uncertain, and we decided to treat this fairly seriously because it impacts all of our systems, as you can see. And when it comes to uncertainty in the future, there are many things, like a myriad of things that we could feel uncertain about. And we just spent a lot of time among staff to try to figure out which one of those things are most important. Is climate more important? Is potential pandemics more important? Is funding more important? And we just came to, after quite a bit of deliberation, we came to a place where we decided to look at two uncertainties that would be the most impactful on the council, and we also think on the region. So our forecasts face that uncertainty, and as you could see from the previous slide, they are the most impactful on all of our council functions. So we decided to pick regional growth, how much that would take place, and we decided to look at local growth, where that growth would take place. And as a result of that, we kind of came up with 4 scenarios, 4 potential futures. The first one is where we look at a high regional growth scenario, where we have more growth than we anticipate. The opposite of that would be we're growing, still growing, but at a far lower rate.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Can I ask a question?
sure.
is, if you go back one slide, is this the input is this the input for the next slide's output? Or is this a separate, different forecast, and the second one is another forecast? Or is this the data that you're gonna use to do the next page?
That's a good question. What we're doing is, imagine that we're making 5 different forecasts. So they're not our real forecasts, they're projections based on what we consider the future to be. So this is just an illustration just that shows that our official forecasts, really impact everything. So we decided what happens if we played with the forecasts.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yep, and when you play with the forecasts, the output is, you have 4 different scenarios.
Correct.
These are the inputs, the next page is the output.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was asking, thank you.
So we looked at 4 different combinations. We looked at the amount of growth when we look at the regional growth. We look at the amount of growth. And then we looked at what kind of growth that was. And we decided to look at compact growth or compact development versus dispersed development. And when I say compact, what I mean is development that already exists in areas that has been already developed, and also development that takes place in relatively high density areas, and development that takes place in forms that encourage transportation modes other than just cars. So something like transit-oriented development would be considered a compact development pattern. And so we just combine those. We have a high regional growth compact, high regional growth dispersed, low regional growth compact, and low regional growth dispersed. And in addition to that, we have what we call the business as usual scenario. And the business as usual scenario is what would happen if things didn't change? If previous trends carried to the future, what would that look like? And our goal is really to try to understand how each of these scenarios compare to the business as usual. So think of the business as usual scenario as the intersection of those axes, basically. And we're just exploring what if you went to each different quadrant. So how do we define extent of growth? We decided that for high growth, if our growth is happening at a rate which is 50% more than our currently forecasted regional growth, we call that high growth. And for low growth, we're still going to be growing, but it would be 25% less than our current estimated future growth.
So why did you pick 50% for one and 25 for the other?
That's great. I was waiting for that. Well, these are to some extent arbitrary numbers because it's a hypothetical exercise, but we also wanted this to be both plausible and significant. So Todd actually tweaked our regional forecast model and tried to see if by tweaking with some of the assumptions in a plausible way, how much we would grow if we really wanted to grow fast. So this 50% number really is a plausible high growth number. If we pushed it to 75, it would probably be not so plausible. And for the 25%, it's the same logic. We just tweaked with the model assumptions and tried to come up with something plausible, but we also wanted it to be.
So even if we screw things up and drive away growth, we won't drive away that much growth. But
Hopefully, we're doing pretty good. Hopefully.
Okay.
So and we also wanted to show some change in terms of our scenarios need to be significantly different from each other. So we had to crank up the levers a little bit just to make it extreme. In reality, would we expect it to be this high? Probably not. But we just wanted to hypothetically amp up the effect so that we can see different pieces.
Okay.
So in terms of locational growth, when we start talking about more compact versus dispersed, these bars show different development patterns. I should say that each scenario is a land use pattern, basically. Where people live is what a scenario is. So in terms of compact development, we just look at compact in terms of how much development overall tilts toward urban centers and urban areas. Just the blue areas in here are the urban and urban center areas. They come from the community designations. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna refer to them as urban areas, the blue areas. And the orange areas are made up of suburban edge, and emerging suburban edge. And the gray areas are rural and agricultural places. So if most
those are the thrive definitions.
yes, sorry,
Not the ones that we just
Have
talked
not
about.
been adopted yet.
Right, exactly. No, these are completely based on the thrive definitions. So for compact development, you can see the urban share of the development is a lot higher than the others. This is the top bar. So 50%, I believe that's the number, is leaning toward urban and urban center areas. And a lower share of the development takes place in suburban areas. And when I say lower, that's compared to the middle bar, which is the business as usual. Business as usual, as you can tell, it's pretty stable or balanced, I should say. Urban and suburban areas actually kind of split right in the middle, and the remaining is the rural areas. So over the last 10, 15 years, we've been growing in a pretty balanced fashion. And most people actually don't know that. Some of us were surprised to see that too. The shares are fairly similar. In terms of dispersed development, you see development patterns that are gravitating more toward the suburban areas. And the urban share of development is, compared to the business as usual, it'll be a lot less, basically. So just to quickly go over this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Just to explain the process to you a little bit, we have a regional forecast model called REMI, and those numbers, the number of people and households and jobs that are in our region, comes out of that model. And once we get those numbers, we plug those numbers into our land use model. And our land use model is the model that distributes people. It calculates the possibility of people living in different portions of the region and spits out a regional distribution of households and population and jobs. So when we get the results from the land use model, that gives us our local forecasts, basically. So for this scenario exercise, we run this process 5 times. We just do the business as usual. We plug in the numbers for high growth and dispersed growth through our urban the land use model. And for each one of those, we have corresponding regional and local forecasts. So that's how we get our land use results, by using these 2 models. So what can we do with these models? Each time we run the model, as I said, it's a land use pattern. It's a different land use pattern, and we're dealing with 5 of those. So in each case, you can look at the results of that kind of a land use pattern. For instance, you can look at scenario 1 and say, how many acres of land was used as a result of this type of regional development? Or we can just say, how much agricultural land we lost as a result of this particular feature. So each time we run the analysis for each particular scenario, we have results associated with them, and they give us an idea of, for instance, if I am the type of person who cares about acres of land used, if I don't want extra land to be used, I can just say, oh, scenario 2 is a good scenario. We didn't use much land in that case. And then you can start thinking of what about other aspects of scenario 2. And same goes with loss of agricultural land. If you worry about losing too much of it, you can just look at the results and make a judgment call as to which scenario is likely to be a better one than not. So one question that comes up.
Wait, when you say likely to be a better outcome or not, what's your basis for better? What's your definition of better?
that's exactly what I'm hoping to get to today. So
Okay.
in a couple slides, I will get to that. So one thing that comes up a lot is equity, and most people say, like, what about equity going into the future? What are we gonna, what does that mean to talk about equity in the future? So we know that the future is gonna pan out in different ways, and we're trying to figure out how that would impact equity. What kind of issues that pertain to equity that might be, that might come up as a result. And we figure out that, you know, we can ask 3 questions that would really get to the crux of those issues. And these questions are evolving, and we'd be happy to hear more from you about them as well. But we can ask these 3 basic questions. How would this specific type of change impact different communities? Once you take a different path into the future, who does this impact? Who is impacted in a favorable way and who is not impacted in a favorable way? But we need to figure out the impacts of what the future is going to bring to us first. And then on top of that, we just ask, who are the folks who benefit? Who are the ones that are negatively impacted? So it has a nice filter to it in the sense that we can think about equity not only in the present, but also in the future. So just kind of bringing it back to land use connections, I want to talk a little bit about, you know, what this could do for us. So the one thing that scenario analysis could really do is it makes our policies hopefully more resilient to uncertainty. It's kind of hedging your bets. You just try to figure out what would, if I use this particular policy in this particular case, would it work as well under a different scenario? Could we come up with robust policies that would work under each scenario, or that would work maybe under most of them? So you're trying to find things that are trying to make your policies more resilient to unexpected changes. So that's really one of the most important roles of scenario framework. And as I said, you know, this gives us an idea of evaluating policies under multiple futures. We can see when they will be impactful, when we will see when they are not as helpful. And also scenario analysis, it helps us align our investments across policy areas. So say you have some transportation or transit line investment that you're considering, maybe your transit line is going through an area where you have some water supply issues. So you want to make sure that those 2 investments align better, as that way they don't undermine each other. And thinking about everything at the same time, it kind of gives you an idea of how things would line up, either if they're going to align well or if they're going to be undercutting each other. And that way you can look at policy trade-offs and synergies and make more effective policy decisions. And, you know, at the end of the day, these scenarios are about land use, and land use connects to everything. And so investigating how our policies will be impacted by different land use patterns is really, it connects us to all policy fields. Land use is really at the core of these policy decisions. So by using these scenarios, we can, you know, think about and develop policies to achieve or develop some regional goals and values. And we can also mitigate some of the undesired outcomes that we would like to avoid. So next steps. Today, what we are hoping to do is we want to get some feedback from you on some of the results that you might be interested. I brought up 2 of them: land use, acres of land used, and acres of agricultural land lost. But there are other things depending on your values and goals, and no one has a monopoly on it. We want to hear from your values, from your point of view. What are the kinds of results that you're interested in? And also, we want to come back. We have a lot of other models, not just our land use model, but a lot of other models like wastewater model, water supply model, transportation, transit. All of these models are taking these land use results, and we input those land use results into our other models, and they give us some transportation results. They give us some water results. So in a number of policy areas, we can talk about how these scenarios could look like. For instance, we can say, in this scenario, our affordable housing need would be this much. In this scenario, we would be using this much water. So it is not only limited to land use, but it's limited to all our other policy areas that we are serving in. So we want to come back to you and run these by you and get your opinions about, with actual numbers in front of you, get your opinions about, have you speculate about different scenarios and find out which ones work well from your point of view, and your point of view will be different, and hopefully we will give you enough measures or enough results that you're going to be telling us from this point of view, I like this scenario better because I care about this particular issue. So that's one of the reasons we are here to get your feedback. And so that's pretty much what I said in here. And as I said, you can ask for results that you're interested in all kinds of policy areas. It could be, greenhouse gas emissions, it could be water demand and job accessibility. So bring it on. And I should say that we can't deliver all of it perhaps because our models don't always generate actual quantitative results, but we do, we can also talk about these things in qualitative ways. It's just a sort of a scaffolding for our policy conversations. So I hope you find it useful. That's all I have. Thank you.
So this is your opportunity to play God with the scenarios, John.
So my day job, part of my day job, I'm a quantitative analyst and forecaster and do a lot of this kind of stuff. So this is something that I actually like. And so always in creating these, it's the data. If you go to that one, you don't have to do it, but on page 5, they had all the data. The data has to be good data or the model's gonna suck. And so if you have multivariable inputs and you have multivariable outputs, and then you'll have to mesh them together at the end. And when I do, and you mentioned quantitative, like the quantitatives, in doing good forecasting and modeling, you have to let the quantitative stuff do the quantitative stuff, and then you create the qualitative stuff on top of that, rather than trying to figure out qualitative stuff just in a random fashion. And when I do analysis and like Monte Carlo projections and stuff, I put time into getting the inputs right and coming up with the probability and the standard deviation, and then the minimum I do is 1,000, and then graph the results. So if you're doing a quantitative model, you should be able to randomize the variable and have and create a model that, when I do it, I say, well, here's the base case, which you'll end up with a base case, and then you'll have this wide array, and out here will be the low probability stuff, and with statistics, it's most of the stuff is going to be in the middle. But so in my modeling, I say, okay, we know that this stuff might happen, and if it does, well, here's what's going to generate the output, because if it's a 10-year forecast or whatever, it should be dynamic enough to be like if we have a pandemic next year and no one can go into the downtowns, just hypothetically speaking. In theory, in a model that accounts for a non-likely event, you could say, okay, here's an input, let's rerun the model, and this is the output is this. And then you're adaptable as on the fly. So hopefully it's not a static model. You're asking your opinion on this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't have to wait till 2060 to run the model again, because things are gonna happen. And if we have things that happen, it would be useful system-wide to say, well, this is happening, and when we ran the models, we're gonna need X, or this has to happen, or that qualitative stuff. We thought about this, we accounted for it. If this number comes in, these are the things we think about. Like at our city council, we're building a water tower. It's basically one variable where, what if we don't have growth? So we can think about, well, if nobody moves to Corcoran ever again, how is it gonna impact the model? And so we thought of worst case scenario, and the best case scenario is we like build another water tower. But I don't really care about the best case scenario. For my town, it's like, well, what if all this stops? So for me, I'm interested in the inputs and how much thought has been put, and how many are there, and how much thought has been put into the variable. Like when you say up 25, here's where it'll have impact if growth goes up 50 or down 25. Like that, I'm skeptical of how that, if you're modeling, the only way that would make sense is if they're the equal probability of both. Otherwise, you're gonna find something wrong with the model. So I would like to know the impact, the dynamicness of it, if we change something, how does it impact the output? And then I think the quantitative stuff or the qualitative stuff, it's gonna be an interesting discussion. Then you can weigh what's important. But for me, devil in these modeling things is always the details. And then 5 is not enough to generate, I don't think, enough useful data. It's gotta be randomized.
I was just trying to simplify it. God knows, I think they ran this model 89 times.
Yeah.
Todd sits there and is part of a team of 7 people who work on this. Would be more than happy to provide details. I figured it might give you a headache.
No, this is food for me.
That's great.
So-
No,
so
we can,
Staff can provide you with
Yeah,
all the
we can-
food you need.
Perfect.
we can certainly arrange a briefing like that.
Yeah, because most of us, it's kind of,
Well, I might
but
like,
if you understand it, that's awesome if you can dig in.
I kind of maybe should come in. I mean, if you really want input, I could maybe just come in.
Yeah, set up a time that you
Yeah.
can come in and dig through the details, that would be great. Other people?
I was by Paradise.
I'll just buy a paradise.
April, I have to get out of here, but one thing that came to my mind, and I don't know if this makes sense to others, but I kind of wanted to have a measure that compares sort of just like quality of life, you know, as part of this process. So I thought about, maybe public health outcomes or something along those lines would be a good measure.
Okay.
I gotta head to the next event.
Well, thank you very much for coming in.
Yeah. See you guys.
Good to see everybody, by the way. Good to see you,
Yeah.
April.
It's nice to meet in person again. It's a different dynamic than when you're sitting in front of a screen.
I know,
April, do you know when you're being sworn in?
The 9th.
Oh, January?
Yep.
We're very excited for you and we're happy for Brooklyn Center to have you in charge.
Yeah, my plan, what I've been spending most of my time doing right now is setting boundaries.
That's a good plan.
Yes. I still have a full-time job, I'm not going to kill myself doing this. And it's a team effort, right? All right, guys, take care.
So I just, to understand, because I'm one of the people that's I'm not like John at all. On the 5 different scenarios, you've basically synthesized it down to 2 variables. Compact versus dispersed growth, and then high growth versus low growth. And then just sort of the 4 combinations of those versus the business as usual. Do we know, or can we say what inputs contribute more to a compact, high growth as opposed to a, dispersed low growth or the other two. I mean, so that we have an understanding, because that's where I think that gets into some of the policy discussions is, especially if you start talking about desired future as opposed to just comparing the range of possibilities. Because that's one thing, is to look at the range of possibilities and make sure that we have policies that can best address as much of the range of possibilities as possible. That's one thing. That's sort of making sure that our policies are robust and can handle that. The other piece of it is if we start saying, well, we want to have policies that start steering the future in one direction versus another, that's a whole other discussion. And for both of those, there may be different measures that we want to look at when we're talking about this. So I'm a little not quite ready to say, here's the measures that I want to make sure we look at. And
Are you pro-steering or anti-steering?
well, once again, I guess I need to understand better what gets us to one versus another. I mean, just sort of intuitively, I would say, gosh, more dense and high growth, that sounds bad. I would love things to be more dispersed and lower growth, but I mean, I don't know what's causing one versus another necessarily, and is it because of policy decisions we're making, or are we just trying to reflect possible scenarios? Because if we're just trying to reflect possible scenarios, I think we do want to make sure that our policies can reflect the range of possibilities that might come down the road, but I'm not sure about the notion of steering one way versus another. That's not what I kind of understood going into this as the beginning of the presentation, but that's actually something we're contemplating. That's a lot of time.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes.
we are responsible for guiding growth and development in the region. And so there may be some things that you do want to steer away from, say prime island or something along those lines, but that's part of the policy conversation where we hope to hear, like, well, what are the things that we say, not this, but this? And where do we hear those values come out in conversation? Because there are some places, even within a model, where we say, no, for real, this is the policy. You can't develop towers along the St. Croix River. It's not allowable. There's federal law that prevents that. So there are some things that, certainly I don't think we often think about it as steering, but we do have a lot of protections and protective measures in this region already. And so when you think about those as policy examples, those are the types of things that we think about when we're, while we're using this kind of extreme hypothetical, it helps us to reveal what are some of those sort of what's off the table and what's on the table sort of conversations that help us think about other policies we might consider or strengthening policies we already have.
Anybody else?
Yes, Madam Chair, I guess from my standpoint, I just do your thing and let's take a look at what you got and let's go from there. And then make our adjustments as we move forward.
So the thing that pops into my mind is something that I think is important is having choices. Because, when you're looking at where you might want to live, if there's not options that you like, you pretty much cross that area off of your list. And so having different options depending on what your lifestyle is and what you're looking for, I think is a plus in terms of bringing investment in the region. That makes sense.
You mean you don't want to raise chickens in a high rise? That's what it sounds like.
My son and daughter-in-law's house is known locally as the chicken house. They live on a county highway and the chickens eat along the edge of the road, and when people ask where do you live, they say, we live in the chicken house.
Madam Chair, I have a few measures that might be within the scope, might not be, of feasibility, but so it's kind of adjacent to the greenhouse gas emissions, but maybe like average commute time, whether or not that's in a personal vehicle or mass transit of some sort. I was thinking about renewable energy production by acre, either lost or gained. Solar panels come to mind, but also wind, and maybe there's some other options that are on the horizon. And I think there was one more, but I lost it. Oh, maybe something if, to do with like ease of emergency responses, like average emergency responder time to get to a specific, new node of development or that sort of thing.
That data is available. First responders.
Yeah, some of it's not really affected by land use though, it's other factors.
Sure.
Staffing. Anything else? If you think of other stuff, you can always email it in too, you don't have to have all your ideas now.
I would hope this data is used to help us and not become, the Met Council's gonna make your city do this because of its impact on
No,
whatever.
so that's the idea, is to help us understand and visualize things better. The decision part on how to be comes later, and there's intentionally a very strong local component in that, because when our system plans come out, you have to have a substantial departure from them in order to be told, no, you gotta go back to the drawing board. There's a lot of leeway locally. As long as you play by the basic rules, there's supposed to be a lot of leeway in there.
Except for Corcoran.
Call me next time.
I will.
But I think when you were talking about the water tower issue, like in the case of different scenarios, you can look at what happens if, my area, the high dispersed scenario, I get a lot of growth. What happens under that circumstance versus, oh, we're not growing, or the growth is happening in the core. So it gives you a tool to think about things that are pertinent to your city as well.
Yeah, it's nice that it be flexible too, because historically speaking, it's like your town's gonna experience this amount of growth, and if you don't, it'd be nice to have a dynamic, which is that I appreciate that.
That's a good point about ranges rather than hard numbers.
Well, and we actually adjust forecasts all the time.
Yeah.
We're actually trying to be flexible. It doesn't come easy, but we're actually trying to be flexible.
It does help to have not a major range though, because we do have to make some pretty major capital investments, so.
Yeah, and there are some things that just happen without us knowing that it's gonna happen either. I mean, I grew up in Golden Valley, and I used to ride my bike on what is now 394, Highway 12, you could cross it on your bike all day long and it didn't matter. And now, everything around Highway 100 and 394 just went, and we had to put some really, really expensive sewer pipes in there because the cumulative growth was more than what the system could handle in that area. So having an idea of what happens does save us a lot in the long run, and some range in there. Okay, we've been going through a lot of time. These have been good discussions. I appreciate everybody. Should we move on to the work plan?
Last two items. I promise to be quick. So this is our first discussion on the Land Use Advisory Committee's 2023 work plan, because the next time we meet will be in 2023. So what you'll see on here is just a draft agenda topics for 23 that really you will see are nearly entirely focused on regional planning. Some of the topics that you heard Dan talk about earlier, Baris was talking about scenario planning, and to Chair Wolf's point about land use, a whole lot of land use policy development will really be at the heart of our work planning, or our conversations here at LUAC, everything from continuing the scenario planning and what that means for land use to starting to identify different policies around the different areas and what that might mean for different community designations as well. We also will discuss relationship to housing policy. That's on our work plan. For our division in community development, it's certainly part probably the largest land use that we have in our urbanized extent is housing. It takes up quite a bit of our base, and it's the thing that people talk about the most, but it certainly is a part of, an important part of comprehensive planning too, an important part of the work that LUAC has played in the past as well in informing policy development for housing. And then any other potential land use related aspects of the parks policy plan, as well as other work. I know April had mentioned transportation topics were of interest, water supply, wastewater, and others may also come in front of you as they relate to land use. But we know there's probably more on this page than we can cover in our 6 meetings in 1 year. We most likely will focus more on the issues that we've talked about around land use, but as we have space and room or desire for or interest in other topic areas, we certainly will bring those in, especially as they relate to some of that land use and kind of guiding growth and development in the region. Would love your feedback. If there are other items that are of interest, or if there's we really, especially under land use, really just put kind of illustrative things, or maybe other things that come up that we say, this is a land use policy that we should be doing that's not on this list. This is just representative of what we have today, but certainly not meant to constrain that conversation. So if we're talking about sustainability, for example, that might be something that we talk about here as well.
Comments, questions? All good.
Then my last one is a lot of housekeeping. So as we're going into 2023, and you've already probably heard Chair Wolf talk about a bit, are your terms as members of LUAC technically end this calendar year, but we'd love that you continue to stay on with us as long as you can, and especially if you wish to reapply for another term. We have our appointment application materials are available on our website already. While we do have a priority deadline in early December, it's really just meant for us to get an opportunity to start moving through and reviewing some applications early, because there are 16 members in this particular committee, so it's 17 with the two.
We have two in
You're right.
Deb's district.
Right, that's correct. Thank you for that correction. And we know that we often have a lot of applicants, so it gets us some early looks so we can start planning for interviews and such. But we certainly would love your interest in continuing in serving on this committee as well, especially as we dig deeper into our policy work. And if you're not interested in serving further, it helps us to know too, so we can start recruiting in districts where we may have vacancies as well. We look to the next term will extend through January 1st of 2027. And we will have additional, like as we get a little more detail on getting all of our ducks in a row, since we have all sorts of appointments that we have to do across our committees at the council. And our council members serve on those nominating committees, getting scheduled.
We're up for
You're also up for
reappointment
reappointment too, so there's a little bit of flux in when, interviews might happen and when appointments might happen, but we're trying to get those nailed down. As soon as we have that information available, we'll definitely be sharing that with you as well. But you certainly can take a look at the application that's available today. It's on our website and linked on our document here too, and should be pretty similar to what you might have seen.
The paper doesn't work,
It
but
doesn't
if you go
work, yeah.
online and click on the link, it'll take you.
Yeah. You can digitally poke at it.
Do we happen to know what the website is?
It's like a council website we have, and I can share the link with you directly in email, and especially because we have some members not here today, we'll follow up with an email with the same information.
And this is like a lot of positions where the prior appointees basically continue to serve until our successors are in place. So inevitably, some of us, if not all of us, will be meeting into January.
Well, please do, because we've already had 3 people hold, so we're,
We have a couple vacancies already, right?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to understand that.
Do we need to fill out all of that stuff, or just put out the application, just put our names in and say, hey, we're interested in doing this again and start over?
Just a thumbs up emoji.
Exactly.
We certainly can share your past application materials with you if that would be helpful, to make it easy. It's a short application.
Yeah, that's a real book.
Thumbs up helps them.
I like Dan's ideas.
Yeah, if it was me, just the thumbs up emoji, I would be good with that, but yeah. 'Cause-
Wouldn't it look terrible if a government, if a government just reappointed people without having them reapply on a formal basis? I don't know.
I think it'd work really good if you're a mayor.
And when we do the interviews, they'll be online, so people don't have to drive in to.
Oh, and we so love the drive.
Especially tonight
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, so,
That's all I have for you today. I'll follow up with email too with the link, so you can just click that and not have to go find it yourself.
well, we need to email the whole
Yep, the whole.
committee so
Yep.
that everybody has the information. And there will be redistricting happening. The legislature has to make new districts, but we have no idea when they're gonna get around to it, and they don't usually do anything quickly. So we're gonna reappoint or appoint under the current districts, and then hopefully we won't have a lot of people be districted in together. In the past, when that's happened, we've kept both of the people until they don't want to do it anymore. So sometimes we've had two members from one district, so we have to have at least
At least,
17
right.
people, but we can have more than that, so. I don't anticipate having to do a whole lot once the redistricting happens, unless we have one that's completely empty, then we'd have to recruit for
Yeah.
the empty one, but hopefully it'll just be the one, and then we're pretty much set for the next 4 years, if that makes sense. Okay? Well,
Thank you.
if there's no further business, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody, for your
Thanks
participation.
for the cookie.